with a brush in one hand, the oil lamp in the other, carefully squinting as they tried to apply the paint. Must have been a very difficult thing to do. But the quality of the workmanship is wonderful. The way in which each detail of this broad collar necklace is shown, the details in the face, the subtle modeling of the lips here, and wonderful detail in the ear and the nose. These are time-consuming operations, even if you're a highly experienced craftsman.
The characters painted on tomb walls can look extremely bizarre.
You've got weird creatures that inhabit the underworld, unearthly beings, alien-type beings. You've got personified snakes. There is a dragon, half hippopotamus and half crocodile, or somebody else which has an absolutely enormous head. It's a funny, weird little character.
Once the painting was finished, the last and most important component of all was needed: the sarcophagus. This was the coffin where the pharaoh would finally be laid to rest. Carved from a solid block of granite or quartzite, a royal sarcophagus could weigh up to 10 tons. With the sarcophagus in place, the tomb was complete. What had begun as a cavern dug out of the bare rock had been crafted into a finely tuned vehicle for transporting the deceased to the afterlife. It was now ready for its royal passenger, the mummy of the pharaoh. The body of the dead pharaoh, Seti I, is almost ready for his journey to the afterlife. After his body has been disemboweled and dehydrated, all that remains is for him to be wrapped in the finest linen.
The wrapping goes on for days and days on end. And in the mummy wrappings, they insert, in very specific places, a number of amulets.
To the Egyptians, amulets had magical powers. The Ankh was one of the most important of these. It would guarantee Seti eternal life. More than 150 amulets would originally have been placed among his bandages.
You will have a set of little steps so that he can climb up to heaven. You will have a tiny little headrest so that the head of the king will always be upright.
Amazingly, more than 3,000 years after his death, Seti's mummified body is still with us. It was discovered at the end of the 19th century and remains on view today in the Egyptian Museum in Cairo.
You look at the mummy and you say, in a sense, he's cheated death. I mean, the embalmers did it. They wanted to give him immortality, and they did. This is top-of-the-line mummification. I mean, this is really the embalmer's art at its best.
On its way to the Valley of the Kings, Seti's burial procession wound its way past a row of huge temples.
The procession for the funeral of the king must have been an absolutely incredible event. The coffin was a very heavy object, and it has to be pulled for miles. They would have carried coffers of precious woods, golden statues, ritual objects that accompany the king to his final destination.
Finally, Seti I was carried into his tomb, set deep within the valley rock. The objects buried with the dead pharaoh could help him in the afterlife, and Seti I had been very well provided for.
When you think about what you're going to put in your tomb, view it as you're going on a trip to a place you've never been before, and you're not sure what to take, so you pack everything.
He needs all the things which made him comfortable in this life, so that when he's reborn, he has his clothes, his cosmetics, his jewellery, everything else he needs for a comfortable existence.
Every aspect of the afterlife was catered for. The pharaoh may have been dead, but he would still have a healthy appetite in the next world.
You would always have bread and beer. You would also have wine, being a king. And if you were a teetotaler, you would have tamarind juice and other lovely juices to keep you refreshed. The menu is fantastic.
The pharaoh even had an army of servants on hand, known as Shapti.
And the idea was that the next world was going to be like this one, so you might have to do work. But who wants to work? So you would have these little magical servant statues that would come to life and serve you and do your work for you.
Every Shapti is inscribed with a spell. If you call me, here I am, I will answer. So you may end up by having 400, 450 Shaptis in your tomb, all neatly packed in a Shapti box, and every single one of them is going to look after you.
Finally, the sarcophagus was sealed. Surrounded by all his treasures, Seti I could now look forward to an eternity in paradise. But when his mummy was discovered 3,000 years later, there was no sign of his treasure. Recent X-rays reveal all that remains of his vast wealth is a single golden amulet still wrapped in his bandages. The rest of the tomb's treasures may have been plundered just 200 years after his death, when disaster struck in the valley. Some of its inhabitants were about to get a rude awakening. It was 1090 BC, remembered by those who survived as the year of the hyenas. Famine has gripped the very heart of the empire at Thebes.
The year of the hyenas is remembered as a terrible year because there was so much disruption in Egypt. The economy had faltered, there were incursions of enemies from the desert, and the crown did not seem to be able to keep the country together.
As the economy collapsed, crime rates soared. In the Valley of the Kings, professional tomb robbers appeared, pitting their wits against the necropolis guards. Once they'd skirted around the guard posts, robbers could then sneak down into the valley itself. Often amongst the gang was a man with insider knowledge of the valley, one of the villagers from Deir el-Medina. Robbers didn't force their way through the front door. Its broken royal seal would be noticed at the very next inspection. Instead, they often broke into tombs from above.
Robbers are the same everywhere. They're willing to take a real risk if the payoff is big enough. And the tomb of somebody like Seti I, there's no bigger payoff.
By breaking into a tomb, the robbers were gate-crashing the afterlife. This was a daunting prospect.
You don't know where you are. It's pitch black. And you're scared. You're terrified. You are in the presence of a dead king. You have in the tomb not only a decomposed